All right, this is the final video for week 1 of logic, and we're covering now basic evaluation of arguments. So I had you do an exercise based on an exercise I learned from my colleague Erica Stonestreet, where you had to sort exercises into piles. And there are actually multiple ways that you could do this exercise correctly, but I just want to show you a couple ways that illustrate important concepts. So one way of thinking about it would be to sort them into 3 piles. And if you do it like this, you're going to have some arguments that are just the best arguments. There are going to be others that are like the best arguments, but they have false statements in them. So actually, let's go over and look at this pile to see the difference. So, all people are mortal. Socrates is a person. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. And that's the best argument. That's your gold standard for argument. That's pile 1. Pile 2. All dogs are dinosaurs. Cupcake is a dog, so Cupcake is a dinosaur. Cupcake is my dog. She's not a dinosaur, she's a chihuahua. So this looks like the first one, but it's got this false statement in it. 2 false statements. All dogs are dinosaurs and Cupcake is a dinosaur. That's an example of what we can think of as pile 1 and pile 2. Then we can just throw everything else into pile 3, the bad arguments. Let me show you 2 of those. All dogs are mammals, all cats are mammals, therefore all cats are dogs. This is bad in 2 ways. It's got a false statement in it that cats are dogs, and the reasoning just doesn't work. Another kind of argument that you might put in a 3rd pile, or you might create a 4th pile to do these, are arguments where the reasoning is bad, but it turns out that all the statements are true. So you can do the exact same reasoning that you just did with dogs and cats, except you do it with dogs and members of the species Canis familiaris. And then suddenly all the statements are true, because Canis familiaris is just the Latin name for dogs. But it's still a bad argument. We're going to stick with keeping these things in 3 piles. The best arguments that are like the best arguments, but they have false statements, and then the bad arguments. So in our terminology, we're going to call the first kind of argument sound. The second will be valid, but not sound, and the third will be invalid. Basically, there are 2 ways an argument can go wrong. The reasons could be false, and the reasoning could be faulty. So given any argument, there are 2 standard checks you want to do. Check the reasons. Are the premises true? Check the reasoning. If the premises were true, would they support the conclusion? And make this a habit, actually. In the real world, even beyond logic, always do both. Check the reasons and check the reasoning. Don't mistake the conclusion for the argument. The arguments we're dealing with in logic, we are trying to be content neutral. So whether or not you agree with the conclusion will not have anything to do with the validity of an argument. You can believe the conclusion, on the other hand, and still think that the speaker did a crappy job of arguing for it. So look, in this section we've got 2 basic evaluative terms, valid and sound. An argument is valid if it is impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. So for an argument to be valid, you just imagine that the premises are true, and then say, do they force the truth of the conclusion? Then an argument is sound if it is valid and it has true premises. So your first set of homework exercises, oh, okay. for valid, you want to check the reasoning. If you check the reasoning and the reasoning is perfect, we say that the argument is valid. Check the reasons. If the reasons are also true and it's valid, we say the argument is sound. So the first one in our pile was a valid argument. All people are mortal. Socrates is a person. Socrates is mortal. You replace some of this with false statements and you still have a valid argument. All people are carrots. Socrates is a person, therefore Socrates is a carrot. Invalid arguments can happen when you start putting the premises in the wrong order. All people are mortal. Socrates is immortal, therefore all people are Socrates. Well, that no longer works, right? It's invalid. You can tell the premises are true and the conclusion is false. And our definition of a valid argument said that the premises, if they were true, would guarantee the truth of the conclusion. You can skip this. Oh, actually, let's not skip this. This is again an example from our sorting. All dogs are mammals. All domesticated canines are mammals. All dogs are domesticated canines. Actually, all the statements here are true. This is like all dogs are Canis familiaris, but the premises don't actually support the conclusion. And you can see that because there was a version of the argument that had cats in place of domesticated canines, and you got true premises and a false conclusion. Right? That looks like that. Validity is a pretty abstract notion, and most real-world arguments do not attain validity, because validity happens when the premises absolutely guarantee the truth of the conclusion. So this can happen in areas with rigid definitions, logical puzzles, legal codes, mathematics. Mathematics is going to be our main example of an area where where validity is possible. Also, if we imagine we have perfectly verified truths, or maybe hypotheticals that allow us to think that we have perfectly verified truths, so like all people are mortal, or for that matter, all humans have purple hair and 5 legs. When we imagine this degree of perfection, we can have validity. But actually, most of the time, we're not going to have validity, even though we've got pretty good arguments. And that will be the subject for the continuing discussion of evaluating arguments next week. See you then. Okay, I'm going to do some exercises in section 2.2, part A, to show you how they're done. The complete set of exercise answers is posted to Canvas, and again, please don't take a look at these until you've tried the questions yourself, because that's how you're going to study enough to be able to do well on the quiz. Okay, so in this case, all we're trying to do is put each argument in standard form and then decide whether it is valid or invalid. And remember, an argument is said to be valid if the premises guarantee the truth of the conclusion, or rather would guarantee the truth of the conclusion if they were true. So the premises don't have to be true, but if you imagine that they're true, the conclusion has to be true. So now look here. All dinosaurs are people and all people are fruit. Therefore, all dinosaurs are fruit. There's your indicator word. That's your conclusion. All dinos are fruit. All dinos are people. All people are fruit. All right. So, is this argument valid? Well, the premises clearly aren't true. But what if they were true? Well, we've actually got something that's of a certain form here. We're saying that all A's are B's, and all B's are C's. Therefore, all A's are C's. That structure in itself is valid, right? You can plug other things in there and you would get an argument that's actually sound. So, all dogs are mammals, all mammals are animals, therefore all dogs are animals. That sort of thing. So this one is valid. Now take a look at this one. All people are mortal. Socrates is mortal. Therefore, all people are Socrates. That's the conclusion. That's your indicator word. All people are Socrates. All people are mortal. And Socrates is mortal. So this is silly, like the previous one. They're both silly, but they're silly in different ways. Actually, in this case, the first two premises are true, and we've got a false conclusion. Now, we know that the one thing about valid arguments is that if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. So we know that this is invalid. All right, take a look at one more. All dogs are mammals, therefore Fido is a mammal, because Fido is a dog. This one is conclusion middle. That's a thing that happens. P1. All dogs are mammals. P2. Fido is a dog. Fido is a mammal. This is valid. It has the exact same structure as number one, but it's got true statements, so it's less silly, but it's the same sort of thing. All right. Let's skip ahead. I want to show you some of the trickier ones at the end. I can tell that bears have been down by the river because there are tracks in the mud. So because is your indicator word. This is the conclusion. Actually, we don't want I can tell that. We just want bears have been by the river. There are tracks in the mud. And those tracks are made by bears almost every time. So this one's a little bit trickier because it seems reasonable. It seems like this park ranger knows what he's talking about, and he's drawn a reasonable conclusion based on the available evidence. But remember, we said that for an argument to be valid, the premises would have to guarantee the truth of the conclusion. But here we just say that these are generally made by bears. Maybe they're made by other things as well. Maybe they're made by people impersonating bears, men in bear suits. I don't know. But we know that these premises aren't enough to guarantee the truth of the conclusion. So it's invalid. It's not a bad argument, though. So we're going to need a separate way to describe it, besides valid and invalid. And it turns out the word we're going to use is strong, but that's for next section.